This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening. Welcome to Dialogue with the Delegation, featuring state senators and representatives from Northwest Florida. I'm Lloyd Patterson. Legislators reacted to Governor Scott's appeal to create jobs by cutting spending. But budget cutting seems to be more popular in theory than in practice, and the governor and legislators find themselves with very low approval numbers. What do you think about the just ended session? You can join the conversation right now by emailing us your questions to WSRE.org. That's questions at WSRE.org. Or you can call them in, 484-1223 or 1-800-239-WSRE. Our lineup tonight: Senator Don Gates of Niceville chairs the Reapportionment Committee and the Budget Subcommittee on Transportation, Tourism, and Economic Development. District 4 takes in coastal areas from Escambia east to Bay County. It's in his second term. Senator Greg Evers of Baker chairs the Criminal Justice Committee and is vice chair of Transportation. District 2, the Senate district, covers the territory from northern Escambia to Bay counties. Mr. Evers formerly served in the House. Representative Clay Ford of Gulf Breeze chairs the House Energy and Utilities Subcommittee. His District 3 includes the city of Gulf Breeze and a portion of the Pensacola area. Matt Gates, Fort Walton Beach, represents House District 4, takes in parts of Okaloosa and Santa Rosa County. Assignments include Civil Justice and Government Operations Appropriations Subcommittee. Doug Broxson of Gulf Breeze finished his first legislative assembly. The new District 3 representative serves on the Finance and Tax Committee, among other assignments. His District 1 includes parts of Escambia, Okaloosa, Santa Rosa counties, including Pace and Milton. Also elected in November, Representative Clay Ingram is assigned to the Education and Agricultural and Natural Resources Appropriations Subcommittee. His District 2 covers parts of Escambia County. District 5, Representative Brad Drake was unable to attend tonight. All delegation members are Republicans. Welcome to Dialogue with the Delegation. We'll start with Senator Gates. The just ended session, you rated as a success or not so successful?
Well, I rated it as realistic, Lloyd. The state of Florida is like a family, and families right now in our state are having to cinch in their belts, make tough decisions about spending. Small businesses are having to do the same thing, trying to retain employees, and the state has done the same thing. The state has had to make some hard decisions in order to keep our budget balanced and take care of our critical priorities. So I would say that we had a successful session in dealing with hard times and hard choices.
Senator Evers, what do you think about the session that just ended?
Lloyd, I feel like that we were given a task. The voters sent us to Tallahassee not to raise taxes and not to be any more regulation put upon them, but to actually reduce regulation. And we fought hard through this past legislative session to actually reduce the regulation that's put upon the constituents here in the Panhandle as well.
Okay. Representative Clay Ford from Gulf Breeze, what do you think?
Well, Lord, at the 5 sessions I've served, this is the most difficult one, I believe. And it was difficult because, at the state level, we have the same things facing us that most of the citizens have facing them due to the economy. And we made those choices, and they were difficult ones, that we wouldn't raise taxes. We'd cut as little as we possibly could, but we knew we had to cut what the state spent and what it continues to spend. I think this was the toughest session. I think it's going to be better next time. The economy still has 2 or 3 years to recover, but we're on the road and we're going to get there.
Thank you. Matt Gates, your turn.
Well, thanks, Lloyd. And, a legislative session is a lot like the year in the life of many Floridians, where we don't get everything we want, but there are certain things that we do and are able to accomplish that we're proud of. One of the things that we're most proud of is that we balanced Florida's budget by cutting spending and not by raising taxes or fees. We also reduced regulatory burdens on businesses by ensuring that the 30,000 rules and regulations on the books in Florida go through a real review to make sure that they make sense for Floridians and that they provide protection for our citizens and our residents. But there are areas where we could have done better. Frankly, one of my biggest disappointments about this legislative session is that we weren't able to pass meaningful immigration reform, something that we should have done that hopefully we'll be able to do in the future, because certainly the rule of law ought to matter in our state. But if we can stay focused on improving the economy, cutting taxes, removing regulatory burdens, then that can be the high water that raises all of the boats in our state.
Thank you very much. Doug Broxson, go ahead.
Well, I was one of 34 freshman Republicans, and the message that we received all across the state was the same: no new taxes and reduce government. And that was a hard task. If you see each one of our emails, you would know that those cuts affected people. But we proved for the first time in a long time in Florida that we could live within our budget, and we did it.
Thank you. And what about Clay Ingram? Go ahead.
Thank you, Lloyd, and I agree with all the previous statements. We went down a road that was difficult. You know, we did what we said we were going to do. We cut spending, even though it was very difficult to do so. We could have taken the easy road and raised taxes, but we promised we wouldn't do that. And the leadership of the House and Senate stood by their word. They were not going to even entertain things that might smell of a tax increase. And that's the right thing to do. That helps us on the road to economic recovery. And in the future, we'll have more resources. So it was, again, successful in that we did what we said we were going to do. And although it was tough and not everybody's happy with the outcome, but we did the right thing.
All right, thank you very much. If you just joined us, you're watching Dialogue with the Delegation here from the Michael Johnson studio at WSRE on the Pensacola State College campus. Glad to have you with us. We are live, so if you have questions you want to ask our legislative delegation, now's the time to call in or email us at questions@wsre.org. And not all questions are necessarily flattering tonight. I'll warn you of that in advance. We have a question from Santa Rosa County. Santa Rosa County will reduce middle and high school classes from 7 to 6 periods and terminate 30 teaching positions to meet budget reductions passed by the legislature. How does cutting teachers and programs benefit students and families?
Well, Lloyd, I'll say that we've learned a lesson in Florida from other parts of the country, and that is that more money doesn't always yield better educational outcomes. Some of the most expensive and well-funded school districts in all of America are some of the least performing in places like Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Baltimore. What we've learned is that the number one factor to make sure that we have a quality educational product in our state is the quality of the teacher and the quality of the administrators that we have in those schools. And so we passed the Student Success and Teacher Quality Act in the legislature this year that ensures that when there is an opportunity to provide raises for teachers, that it'll be the best teachers, the most effective, the highest performing, that receive the opportunity to get treated like the professionals that they truly are. None of us enjoy the fact that per pupil funding decreases this year. But if we can do the things necessary to create a climate of economic growth and opportunity, those will be the first cuts that will be restored. And we know that because in the past, during the best years in Florida, the highest increases, the most money that we got during the best years went to education. So we're seeing a correction there. Hopefully we'll be able to continue to move the ball forward, but it means having great teachers and rewarding them appropriately.
Okay, Doug Broxson.
I want to add a personal note. The FCAT scores came out, and Santa Rosa finished first in reading. We've proven over and over again in Santa Rosa and Okaloosa and Escambia that we can do more with less. And we continue to show that we will make the adjustment this year. I know we're going to cut classes, but we will be productive, and it will show up in our FCAT scores.
All right, Clay Ford.
I discussed that very matter with the superintendent of schools last night, in fact, and we've been very fortunate in Santa Rosa County for the last 3 superintendents. Although we're at the bottom of the per student funding, state funding, for the whole state, Santa Rosa County has done an outstanding job at always being at the top of the ladder in terms of the quality of the school district. And what he told me was that it's unfortunate they're going to have to do some layoffs, but it was strictly temporary, and he assured me that they were going to bring those teachers back very shortly.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll keep going on with more questions. We've got plenty of them. There's still time, though, for you to call them in. Next question from a viewer in our area says, at a time when Florida needs to reduce its budget deficit, why is the legislature reducing corporate taxes? Won't this make the deficit larger?
Now, let me take a shot at that, Lloyd. The governor and I actually had a friendly discussion one Sunday during the session in that regard and about that issue. And it seems to me that the thing that we ought to do as we go forward is to reduce the fees that were increased on auto tags and on driver's licenses. Now, what we were able to do was to eliminate business taxes on the smallest businesses in our state who pay them. So it wasn't big corporations that got a tax break. It was the corporations and small businesses that pay $25,000 or less in business taxes. Those are the businesses that are trying to hang on. Those are the businesses that create jobs. But if I had my druthers, I would combine that with a reduction in fees for working people who have to use their car to go to work.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Lloyd. And I think most of us will be in agreement that we reject the notion that by cutting taxes, obviously for the short term, revenue to the government is going to drop. But over the long term, I think we all would believe that by reducing taxes, that allows corporations to grow and to hire, which in the long term increases, grows the economy and also increases revenue to the government.
Thank you. Next question from a cantonment viewer. Although the announced reason for redistricting restricting third-party voter registration is to prevent voter fraud, Secretary of State Browning stated there was no voter fraud in the 2010 election. What is the real reason for making changes in the law?
Well, one of the problems that we have now, Lloyd, is that we don't know how pervasive elections fraud is when we have a system that institutionally allows that fraud to occur. Now we're going to have a true metric, a true opportunity to see if there is fraud. Here is one statistic that shocked me and surprised me. In Broward County, 94% of the provisional ballots cast are invalid and are rejected. And so when we have a system that allows votes to be cast in other parts of the state that might not be valid, that statistically could be a high probability to be invalid, then it erodes the dignity of the votes in our part of the state where there isn't as much voter fraud. And so, we are all so blessed that we get to represent the people who defend America's freedom. And we have to make sure that their votes count, that they matter, and that they're not threatened by additional voter fraud. So we'll know where that fraud occurs, and we'll know better how to attack it as a result of this bill.
Thank you. Next question. Lots of people in the Florida Panhandle have older homes with aluminum wiring, which was up to code at the time that was built. Some insurance companies no longer writing policies for these houses, including Citizens. Can you do anything to change the situation?
Yes, we have, Lloyd. Thanks to some folks in the business community here in Escambia County and realtors here in Escambia County who came to Tallahassee and met with the chairman of the Banking and Insurance Committee. Now we have Citizens Insurance and also State Farm, both bell cows in the insurance industry, who are no longer taking the view that aluminum wiring will prohibit a house from being insurable. So we've made some real progress in that regard.
Okay.
But it was primarily,
Go ahead.
Lloyd, but it was primarily because of local businesses that actually came to Tallahassee and made it and said, look, it's just as safe. It's up to code. And that was the reason that we were able to get it changed.
Thank you. If you've just joined us, this is our dialogue with the delegation, legislators from Northwest Florida, answering your questions about what happened in Tallahassee in the last few months. And you still have time to ask a question if you want to give us a call right now. Now, let's go to, let's see, here's an item from Pensacola. The governor recently vetoed a line item in the budget for a traffic roundabout downtown. Who put that in the budget, and do you think it was a prudent use of taxpayer money?
I put it in the budget as chairman of the Appropriations Committee in the Senate. I put it in the budget at the request of the Escambia County Commission. They felt that it was a safety improvement. The governor vetoed it, and the county commission will have to address the safety issue in another way. The governor vetoed a number of those traffic safety issues in Northwest Florida because I think he wanted to have the Department of Transportation, the State Department of Transportation, address those issues within their own budget.
Okay, other comments on that? If not, we'll go on to our next question. This is addressed to all of you, a viewer from Mary Esther. What are you gentlemen going to do to ensure a robust illegal immigration law is passed in the next session of the legislature?
Well, let me start, Lloyd, and then defer to my colleagues. I joined Senator John Thrasher in offering an amendment on the floor of the Senate to require E-Verify for all public and private employers in the state. We lost in a floor vote on the floor of the Senate. And unfortunately, then the House of Representatives looked at the bill that didn't have E-Verify for private employers, found it to be a less than meaningful bill, and so nothing passed. But I won't be satisfied until public and private employers have to do what 243,000 businesses in other states do without any problem, and that is use a simple E-Verify system to find out if we're hiring an individual who is here illegally. We shouldn't provide benefits, we shouldn't provide jobs, we shouldn't be good hosts for people who've broken the laws of the United States. But Senator Thrasher and I didn't get the votes this time, but we're going to go back at it next time.
Other comments on the moves to channel illegal immigration? Yes.
Actually, I filed an Arizona state illegal immigration bill, and because of the pushback from South Florida, Senator Gates and I was unable to actually get the bill passed. And Senator Gates worked with me on that as I voted for Senator Thrasher's amendment to that to the bill to add the E-Verify. And it's something that we've got to do. And as a farmer and a person that employs legal workers from out of the country, we have to. We need it for our economy to get the food, to get the vegetables, and get the crops out of the field. But each one, and I'm working at a financial disadvantage when I'm competing against farmers and other folks that don't follow the rules like I do. And it's not fair. It's not fair to the economy. It's not fair to the taxpayers. When other folks will allow their illegals to go to our hospitals and tie up our emergency rooms, and they are allowed to file for food stamps and other giveaway services this often.
Okay. Thoughts from the House on illegal immigrants? Any?
Yeah, the question that was asked was what needs to change? And the real answer is that more folks in the agricultural community need to follow the good lead of Senator Evers. The reason that there wasn't enough support to pass an E-Verify bill, which is absolutely needed in our state, is that too many people that represent districts that are agricultural districts in the citrus growing and tomato growing and sugar growing areas of Florida were unwilling to support any accountability measures for the people that hire illegal aliens. Now, I don't believe it's enough. I don't think anyone here in the Northwest Florida delegation believes that it's enough just to punish people who come here illegally. We also have to attack the environment that's created when there's an economic incentive to engage in illegal behavior. I think one of the bravest moves of this legislative session was the leadership of Senator Evers to step up and say, I'm a person who makes a living in the agricultural industry, and the rule of law has to matter. This is the right thing to do for our state. And so our hope is that more members of the Florida legislature, particularly Republicans from agricultural areas, will follow the good lead of Senator Evers.
Thank you very much. You're watching Dialogue with the Delegation. If you just tuned in, these are our state lawmakers, senators, and representatives who go to Tallahassee and take our interests with them and make tough decisions. And if you've got a question, give us a call or email us right now. The Governor Scott just yesterday or today signed the drug testing bill for state employees, I believe. This viewer wants to know, what are they going to do with kids if they cut welfare recipients off drug testing if welfare recipients fail a drug test?
Well, the bill that the governor signed is a bill which Representative Matt Gaetz sponsored along with others in the House, and I joined Senator Ulrich in sponsoring in the Senate. And the answer to the question is that minor children are not going to be penalized and punished. But the problem is that, and we heard this from the HUD housing director in Walton County. He said, look, For people to live in HUD housing, we're supposed to maintain a drug-free environment, and there's not supposed to be anybody taking drugs. How can we do that without drug testing? So he is asking the Congress of the United States to do the same thing. We don't want to use taxpayers' money to fund or support a drug culture. But if somebody is found to be on drugs and therefore we don't want to subsidize their drug habit, that doesn't mean that the children would be disqualified for financial assistance. It's not their fault. We want to go after the drug culture, not the children.
Other comments on that? Clay Ingram?
Yeah, from a larger point of view, I know the governor was criticized for proposing that bill, proposing the idea, and I was in favor of the idea from the beginning, in theory, and then some things were done to make it much more, real world friendly. Things like an appeals process if you fail the test. There was a question about who would pay for the testing. And now it's set up where if you pass the test, the state pays for it. If you fail the test, it's on you. So it's a good bill, and I was proud to support it. And I think that those changes that were made were important as well.
There was also a question about drug testing for state employees who were going to be hired. Did you support drug testing for new state employees?
Yes. Any private sector job I've ever had, you had to take a drug test. That was, without question. And I just don't see, the reason that we wouldn't test public employees as well. They're working for the taxpayers, and it just makes sense.
Okay, Clay Ford.
Lord, I guess technically we're state employees, so I assume if they have to take tests, we're going to be right there along with them, taking our own drug test, and hopefully be able to all pass it.
Maybe some cholesterol issues might come up, but no serious drugs, right?
That's
okay.
right.
Now, we get this question practically every program, but it's educational probably to revisit it. What happens to the money that was supposed to come from the lottery to public schools?
Well, the money goes to public schools. The lottery proceeds are divided three ways. About a third goes to public schools, and every neighborhood public school in Florida gets a share of lottery funds. You can find out the lottery funds that go to your neighborhood public school by contacting your school district office and asking for the number. About a third of it goes for Bright Future scholarships, so that deserving and meritorious high school students would have a chance at Bright Future scholarships. And of course, about 25 or 30% goes for prizes. So that's where the lottery money goes. But now the dirty little secret is that the lottery funds have begun to go down during a recession. The conventional wisdom is that maybe beer sales and gambling go up. Well, lottery sales have gone down, and so as a consequence, we've had to subsidize Bright Futures, and of course, funding for education has suffered, not only as a result of the recession, but as a result of lottery funds going down.
Greg Evers? Senator Evers, it looked like you wanted to add something
No,
there.
I was totally in agreement with it, and I mean that's what's happened to us here. I mean the lottery, everybody is not playing the lottery. Folks aren't gambling. Folks aren't drinking as much, and I think that's one of the fallacies that folks have. That if you set up gambling, that more folks are going to play.
So the state would be better off if more people gambled and played the lottery
I didn't say
or
that.
drank. Go ahead, Matt Gates.
If you want to help a teacher, if you want to help education, give a teacher $1 instead of buying a lottery ticket, because teachers are reaching into their own pockets to buy school supplies for their students.
Good thought. Matt Gates.
And Lloyd, one of the things that I've learned in my time in the legislature is wherever there's a big pot of money, all of a sudden you have a lot of mouths to feed. And we were using lottery funds for things that we never should have used them for. Representative Ingram serves on the Education Committee, and he and I worked together to eliminate some of the line items in the lottery budget that went to go and fund a gambling addiction hotline. So we were taking money, about $2 million, out of the pockets of students that need Bright Future scholarships. We were thinning the soup on the impact of a Bright Future scholarship to pay for a gambling addiction hotline. We thought that was not an appropriate priority, and we decided to back students. And perhaps if folks have problems with addiction, there are churches and other civic organizations that could be of service to them.
All right, energy-related question here from a viewer in Pensacola. What are you doing, what's the legislature doing to help renewable energy? Why don't we have more bike paths? Doug Broxton, haven't heard from you for a while. You have any
Well,
thoughts on this?
My colleague is the chairman of the Energy Committee, and
Clay Ford.
Clay Ford.
Well, we didn't, in the Energy Committee, didn't consider anything on bike paths. Over in the Gulf Breeze area, as a matter of fact, private citizens through the years have created a system and gotten funded a system of bike paths so that the Gulf Breeze Peninsula, you can pretty much bike all around it, including out to Fort Pickens, without crossing any roads. It's strictly on bike paths. Energy Committee this time, either in the House or the Senate, neither could pass a bill that was acceptable to the governor. So we ended up, and I think the reason is it's like one of those trains. Everybody jumped on board, and it got slowed down so much that we could not pass something that was acceptable. What I'd like to do this next year, if I chair Energy again, is to break it into about 4 bills. One that'll approach how we fund large-scale solar through some kind of pilot programs. Another bill that would look at small-scale solar and renewables with a view of getting that done. Yet another that would deal with an energy policy itself that deals strictly with setting goals and energy policies, so we know really where we're going to try to go in Florida and what percentage of our energy package is going to be renewables and to get us away from carbon. So we're going to try to do it with about 4 smaller bills so that it doesn't get bogged down along the way trying to do everything for everybody in one bill. And if the Senate will do that as well, and I hope they will, perhaps we can come up with a bill this time that'll satisfy the governor and get his support for it.
Okay. Doug Broxton?
This area, we're very dependent on clean burning coal. People think that because we're the sunshine state that we would be ideal for solar energy. That is simply not true. It's just not cost effective for the people of Florida. But we will continue to have coal, and Gulf Power has done some amazing things to make sure that the pollutants off the coal has been reduced. And we'll continue to do that, and it's going to be a big part of our energy program in the near future.
All right, Clay Ford.
If I could add just a couple more comments. One thing that scares me about the renewable picture and low carbon forms of energy is our dependence on natural gas. Everybody thinks that's clean burning, and it is quite a bit more so than coal. But right now, our price here in the United States, because of proven reserves, is about half what the world market price is for natural gas. About 50% of our energy in Florida is produced by natural gas. We're rapidly moving towards 75%. The projections are, though, over the next 4 to 5 years, that the cost will go up 40%. Because now, as we begin to come up with better ways to compress that gas, China and other developing countries are beginning to bid that price up. And we're no longer going to be half the world price. We're going to be up competing at the world price. Now, the 11 years after that, the forecast is only another 10% increase. But it's scary if you think about your gas bill going up by that amount.
Okay, we still taking questions for our legislative delegation here, and of course it goes without saying they haven't seen the questions in advance, but they are no doubt familiar with the subject areas as they deal with it all the time. We had a question here from a Pensacola viewer. Explain why, as Republicans, your mindset is not about helping the average person of our community and the state of Florida as the quality of life has gone down.
Well, Lloyd, I would reject the premise of the question, of course.
Sure.
I think that one of the most fundamental things we can do as conservatives, and you know that's a label sometimes that crosses political lines, but one of the things we can do is give people the promise of limited government. You know, one of the great things about our country is this promise that people have the opportunity to succeed where they can succeed and fail where they ought to fail, and government shouldn't be in the position to pick winners and losers. And so when we reduce the size of government, when we cut taxes, we give everyone the opportunity to realize their maximum potential. That's what contributes to a better quality of life. If more people are able to get jobs because there's a good regulatory climate, a good tax climate, then they're able to make their mortgage payments, pay for their children to go on field trips at school, and that's the type of thing that builds stronger communities. You know, the other thing as Republicans that we all believe in is that we ought to have ownership societies. We ought to give people the opportunity not only to own their own home, but to own the decisions they make regarding where they send their children to school, what kind of health plan they have, and And I think that's a stark contrast between conservatives and folks that have different political philosophies. I'm proud to serve with the people in our legislative delegation who subscribe to that conservative philosophy, who live it, and ensure that the state of Florida gives every citizen the opportunity to realize their promise.
Okay, we have a bunch of other questions here that we want to get to, so I'm going to shoot them out real fast. This from Milton. Currently, there's a law which requires billboard companies to pay into a fund for planting trees to replace those cut down around their signs. Did the bill Senator Evers sponsored, which would allow billboard companies to decide for themselves whether they want to pay into the fund, did that bill pass? And this could cost jobs for people in the nursery business.
Okay, absolutely. That bill is a misnomer, and from the staff analysis of that, it says that the individual that's requiring or asking to cut the trees down can or cannot. It wasn't that way. What the bill would have actually have done was required them, they could do mitigation for two ways. They could either hire somebody, they could pay a penalty, or they could replant the trees themselves. But for the reason of the bill was brought to me by some outdoor advertisers because of the fact that the government at that point in time was requiring them to cut down the view zone and then turn around, and they weren't able to sell the trees or do anything with the trees. They were having to grind the trees up. So they were paying not only a big price to have the trees cut down by an arborist, but they were also being required to actually grind the trees and spread back over the area. And that's the reason for the bill. As far as the mitigation, they would have had to have made some compensation to the state, either by planting the trees or paying a fine to the state, or either allowing the state to plant trees.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question, also from Santa Rosa County. What are the plans to protect citizens or give local control to protect from unregulated discharge of firearms in subdivisions? Matt Gates.
Yeah, Lloyd, I sponsored legislation to ensure that we protected folks' Second Amendment rights, and we assured that in Florida we had a uniform system so that if someone was a gun owner and traveling from one county to the next or one city to the next, that they wouldn't inadvertently become a criminal. In Santa Rosa County, in one small neighborhood, there was a circumstance where someone had set up a firing range that was objectionable to some of his neighbors. And in a circumstance such as that, there will still be an opportunity for local control, and local governments will have the opportunity to designate where there are appropriate and inappropriate gun ranges. Now, I'm very proud that I've got such a great partner that defends the Second Amendment with me back to back in Senator Evers, and I think that ensuring that our Constitution matters is something that we all ought to be proud of.
Thank you. Next question I want to ask regarding Senate Bill 1246 introduced last session, which would have banned videotaping or taking photos on farms. This documentation would expose food safety violations and animal abuse. Why is that a problem instead of an action that we should appreciate?
Well, that legislation was sponsored by Senator Norman from the Tampa Bay area. I voted for the bill on the Senate floor. And the reason is because there have been so many abuses where individuals have trespassed onto private property, have filmed activities, have then edited those films in a way that gave a misleading impression of what was going on a farm. I think that a farmer, and I grew up on a ranch, I think a farmer like Greg Evers, a rancher like my parents were, have a right to have their own property protected from trespassers. And that's what Senator Norman's bill did. If there is any evidence of criminal wrongdoing by anybody in animal husbandry or anything else, then we have laws on the books that would allow those individuals to be prosecuted, and they ought to be prosecuted.
Other comments there? All right, we have a question from a college student. You favor privatizing prisons to save money, but wouldn't the real savings come from giving early releases or parole to nonviolent offenders who would benefit from an unincarcerated setting? Otherwise freedom, I guess, or out of jail.
As chair of the Criminal Justice in the Senate, we were actually looking at some form of that, and had introduced some language that for nonviolent, we would reduce, instead of the 85, we would reduce it down to 65% time served. Then actually what we did was rate them into 3 different, and the hardest would actually do 96%. So, you know, we were looking at that, but little to say, wasn't able to get anything passed this year. And we're waiting on an interim study that will actually tell us how much money the Department of Corrections will save as benefit to the taxpayers in the state of Florida.
Okay, any other thoughts
But
on
keeping safety first?
safety? Okay, Clay Ford.
You know, we've created part of the problem through the years by tying the hands to some extent of the judges in requiring mandatory sentences for a lot of nonviolent offenses. And I think we've not had enough money to put into rehabilitation and retraining programs, treatment programs, and that's what we need. We've got a lot of folks locked up who are drug users who, were they able to get the right kind of treatment programs, perhaps could kick the drug habit and be safe back out on the streets. That'll really cut down on costs. It's much cheaper to have treatment programs than it is to incarcerate people.
Okay. Other questions, answers on that one? Okay. Let's go to another question from Milton. BP recently paid $100 million into the Natural Resources Damage Assessment Program to begin restoration of seagrass beds, oyster reefs, and a bird habitat impacted by the spill. The aquatic preserve staff on Garcon Point would be the logical choice to identify and monitor oil spill restoration projects. Can a portion of the BP funds be used to keep the office open?
Well, it's an interesting question, and it might be a good approach. I would suggest that the questioner might want to contact the new Secretary of the Department of Environmental Protection, Herschel Vineyard, who is somebody who I think is open to new ideas and open to making sure that we use those funds in an appropriate way. Let me just say as well, Lloyd, that we have passed the Oil Spill Economic Recovery Act that will provide that 75% of fines and settlements paid by BP, Halliburton, and others flowing from the federal government to the state or directly to the state will be used to benefit the 8 coastal counties of Northwest Florida. I sponsored that bill. Everybody around this table was involved, especially Senator Evers, Representative Gates were very involved in getting that bill passed. And that would as well provide us with funding, probably substantial funding for environmental reasons, but also to diversify our economy.
Doug Broxton, you've held a number of meetings about complaints about BP payments. Are you satisfied now that they are handling things appropriately?
Absolutely not. They're not going to. When BP and the president chose to hire Ken Feinberg, they really chose to shut down the program. What they've done instead is they've hired 200 investigators going out to try to find people that are committing fraud. And it should be. People that commit fraud should be put in jail. But it's a wrong message to send when you're closing down centers. You're trying to find those folks that are trying to make it, and their information now, they simply will not submit it because they're afraid that some third eye will look at it and say it's inappropriate. I'm very disappointed with the process. They paid $4 billion. They promised to pay $20 billion. The question is, what will happen to that money? Will it go back to BP? Will it go to Mr. Feinberg? Will it go to the federal government? Or will it come here?
All right, thank you. Next question from Mary Esther. Septic tank law is a prime concern with citizens of the Panhandle. What do we need to do to assure a law gets passed in the next session?
Well, Senator Gates and I tried that. Actually, Senator Gates worked to actually give us a moratorium, to extend the moratorium by putting it in the budget. We actually had a bill that would repeal the septic tank law, or the septic tank portion of SB 550, as most folks refer to it. But we were unable. We passed it through a health committee. It got tied up in the environmental committee, and then the senators from South Florida took the reins on it and tried to come up with their own bill. And when they did that, It put our bill in jeopardy, and they laid our bill down and tried to move theirs. It went to the floor, was starting to be heard. Actually, Senator Gates and I had an amendment, or several amendments, that would have actually have stricken the bill back to, in essence, our bill of just doing away with the mandate of the septic tank inspection. But it failed to come up, so we're just in a good position because the budget puts it off. And after speaking with the Secretary of Department of Health, they have assured me that they're not moving forward with it because they said the intent of the legislature was well heard.
All right, Doug Broxton, comment on that?
Well, we had vigorous debate in the House on the septic tank, and we had 3 representatives that voted against it. So we had more than 100 that voted for it. It is a bad precedent. It takes away the authority of the local government and puts it back on the state. And hopefully this next year we will be able to come to an agreement that both the Senate and the House can pass out that bill.
All right, thank you much. We're continuing now with dialogue with the delegation here on WSRE, PBS for the Gulf Coast. We have one viewer who just sent in 14 questions. I don't know that we'll get to all 14 of them, but it seems fair. Your mom came through, right? No, there are some questions, and I don't think these would be from your mom based on the tone of them. A balanced state budget with no additional taxes or fees. Is this a conservative dream come true or a pipe dream rife with unintended consequences? The spending cuts mandated to accomplish this budget, how will they affect the man on the streets?
Well, that sounds more like a speech than a question, but let me take a shot at it. In my 5 sessions in the Florida legislature, I have never had anybody from Northwest Florida, any person who is a member of a family here or who runs a small business here, say that the best economic policy that we ought to engage in is to take more tax dollars out of their pockets. Now, there are some people who say tax the other fella, but I haven't had anybody so far in the 5 sessions I've served say, you know, I want to pay more taxes. That's the best economic policy. So it's not a conservative dream. What it is economic reality. Every single president, Democrat or Republican, since John F. Kennedy, has said that the best thing to do in a recession is to cut taxes, to stimulate the private sector, to create more jobs. That's what the Florida legislature did this time. We're seeing jobs being created now. The Oil Spill Economic Recovery Act that I sponsored, that we spoke about just a moment ago, allows the diversification of our economy. And the way we were able to pass that act to provide millions of dollars in additional help for Northwest Florida was because we were cutting taxes and balancing the budget.
All right. Next question. Governor Scott made a statement in pulling out of the planned Florida high-speed rail project. Other governors then got to clamor over the associated money. What, if anything, do you see coming this way to Florida in general, the Panhandle in particular, with respect to public transportation? Gas prices don't seem to be falling appreciably. There are a few alternatives. Transportation infrastructure is deteriorating, and high speed could provide viable alternative to air transportation. First of all, did you support the governor's decision to forego the money to build the high-speed rail, what, from Tampa to Orlando?
Yeah, Lloyd, you know, a lot of the problems with, and that happens with local governments from state government, and it happens with state government when programs come down from the federal level, that you're given money to either build or create something, and the money is there, and you build or create or fund positions, and then after 2 or 3 years, that money is gone, and you're left with this thing you created. In this case, it's high-speed rail. And then from then until eternity, you have to pay for it. And I think it was a wise decision not to fund high-speed rail right now using temporary federal dollars that won't be there in 2 or 3 years. And then the taxpayers of Florida are burdened with that system that rails across the country usually do not make money. You know, they are always subsidized. So that's I think it was the right thing to do.
Other comments on that? Clay Ford.
Funding that high-speed rail, first of all, would have brought no benefit to Northwest Florida. There was no proposal whatsoever that any of it would come here. Secondly, it was going to take about $250 to $500 million of state money to have made that happen. This is just not a year where we could afford to do that. So I think the governor made the right decision in this particular case.
Matt Gates?
Lloyd, I absolutely supported the governor. I think it sends the right message about the wasteful spending, frankly, that's occurring too much in Washington, and that Florida's not going to be a willing participant. But to anyone who opposed the governor's decision, here is the business opportunity that I'd give any of them. I'm going to start your business opportunity by giving you $2 billion. Now, that, of course, won't get you off the ground. Every estimate says you'll have to spend another $1.2 billion on top of that to get into the business. And then the estimation that some were saying, rosy expectation, is that there'd be 3 million passengers annually on this particular stretch of high-speed rail. Now, there are only 3.5 million on the rail system between New York and Washington, D.C. And so I think it is a little optimistic and perhaps naive to suggest that we'd have 3 million between Tampa and Orlando. So in this business opportunity that I'd give you, you'll have to kick in somewhere between $100 and $200 million a year where you'll be operating in the red. And if you ever want to get out of that business, of course, you'll have to give me the $2 billion back. I have yet to meet anyone who would engage in such a thing. I'm sure glad we've got a business-oriented governor who made the right decision for Florida.
Okay, home insurance, our next topic. My insurance rates have just doubled, and my home has never had a claim on it since it was built in 1967. What will you do about this?
Well, insurance rates, and this is not a popular thing to say, but I think it's the right thing to say. Insurance rates in Florida will continue to go up as long as insurance underwriters believe that Florida is a risky place to do business. Now, in my view, insurance rates have gone up more than they should have, but the alternative would be for the state to begin to force insurance companies to write insurance and write insurance at rates that we declare and we define. Now, we got into the insurance business with Citizens Insurance. How's that working out for you so far? So it seems to me that the state needs to pull back from trying to dictate the insurance market. The hard fact is that insurance rates will continue probably to rise in Florida until we have more competition and until we have less risk. Now, we've had 80 more insurance companies come into the state of Florida in the last 4 years. That's provided some additional competition and some additional choice. But Florida represents the riskiest property insurance market in the world. And so consequently, we're liable to get charged more for insurance. It is sad, it's true, but the question then becomes, what should the state do about it? Should we pass laws? Should we take over the insurance industry and tell insurance companies who they must insure and at what price? Do you really want to create a wall-to-wall Pensacola to Key West conglomerate of government-run insurance? I don't think so. So what we really need are a few more years of quiet and not a lot of named storms. And then we need more insurance companies being brought into the state and encouraged to come into the state in order for us to have more competition and choice.
All right, thank you very much. We've got about 50 more questions to go and not much time, so let's jump right into it. This goes back to the Santa Rosa school, a public school system is laying off teachers, cutting hours for students, and this coming year, but it gave raises to a principal and assistant principals. They want to know whether you think that's fair.
I don't think it's fair at all. I was the superintendent of schools in Okaloosa County, and I'm sure I made many mistakes as superintendent. The good things that happened there when we went from 27th in the state to first in the state academically weren't because of me, but because of effective teachers and great school leaders and a visionary school board. But I think that when you have to say to people, we don't have a job for you, and when you have to say to classroom teachers upon which educational effectiveness is based, that you can't give them a raise, then the people at the head shed shouldn't get raises either.
Okay, thank you. Other comments on the Santa Rosa school system?
I'd just say that, I was proud to vote for a budget that reduced the salaries of legislators. And, we had to lead by example. When we were not giving pay raises to state employees, our salaries went down. And I think that that is how leadership ought to operate in the public sector.
Okay, here's a question I've never come across before, and good luck on this one. Are there squatters' rights on real estate without paying property taxes? You ever heard of squatter rights on
I'll
I
take
don't
a
know.
stab at it.
Somebody with a phone and a cardboard
we have a
box,
concept
maybe.
called eminent domain.
Adverse possession.
Adverse possession, is the term I was looking for. And it varies by state. And adverse possession means you take possession of the property adverse to the person who actually owns it, which means most states you live on it, put a fence around it, plow it and plant strawberries or in some other way exhibit your possession of it. But in no way you're ever going to be able to get a clear title to it without paying taxes. That's going to be a part of it at some point.
All right, and question now about reapportionment, Senator Gates. What is the status of reapportionment of the district? And there was a question, I can't find it now, but they asked if it was going to be so that there could be someone from Santa Rosa County or Escambia County or Santa Rosa County who would be a senator from this district. Will it be divided up?
Well, I chair the reapportionment committee in the Senate. Will Weatherford chairs the House redistricting committee. We're about to start a series of 26 public hearings across the state to gather citizen input. But we just have amended the Constitution. The voters of Florida amended the Constitution to say that, and this is a quote from the Constitution, no line may be drawn, no line, with the intent to either favor or disfavor any incumbent or any political party. So you can't just say, well, we're going to draw a Senate district for Santa Rosa County or for Escambia County or Okaloosa County. Instead, Senate districts, House districts, and congressional districts have to be equal in population. We have 40 Senate districts. They need to be equal in population. So you start with the fact that Senator Evers and I each, at the end of the day, have to have 480,000 people in our district. We can't pick and choose which counties they're going to be. There have to be 480,000 people, and if that means part of one county and part of another county and part of another county, or all of two counties, then that's the way it has to be. But we're going to ask the people of Florida what they think, how they believe the standards in the law, the Federal Voting Rights Act, and these new provisions of the Florida Constitution ought to be implemented. And we'll start in Pensacola on the 21st of June with a public hearing to which everybody will be invited. Come and bring your ideas about how you believe districts ought to be drawn. But remember, they have to be equal, they have to be fair, and they have to be legal.
All right, next question. Why do those who support limited government place so many restrictions on reproductive issues, requiring unnecessary procedures, ultrasound, adding to the medical costs for poor women? Shouldn't the physician make these decisions?
We believe in limited government, Lloyd, but we don't believe in no government. And any government that exists that is unable to protect the most vulnerable life that exists, unborn life, is not a government that I want to be a part of. I was so proud to join with Representative Ford, Representative Ingram, others in the House to move forward some of the best pro-life legislation that any state has seen in quite some time. We're going to protect the unborn in Florida. We're not going to use public tax dollars to pay for elective abortions. There will be ultrasounds that can give women more information about abortions before they have them, and that hopefully leads to better decisions. But I don't think any of us here on the dais make any apologies about the fact that government ought to protect vulnerable unborn life.
Thank you. While the Taxpayer Bill of Rights will not apply to city and county governments, its purpose is to limit state revenue, which will eventually affect local governments. Why is the legislature proposing this as a constitutional amendment, given the fact that it proved disastrous when it was tried in Colorado?
I'm one of the sponsors, along with President Herodopoulos, of SmartCap. And the SmartCap legislation is not the same as the legislation that was tried in Colorado. Instead, our legislation, which will place a question on the November 2012 ballot, simply says this: should state government grow faster than inflation and population? Yes or no? If you think that state government taxing and spending should grow faster than the additional people that we would have in the state, for whom we have to build sidewalks and gutters and schools, if you believe that government ought to spend more than businesses and families spend on additional items, whether it's sweeping compound or paper or employees, then you need to vote no. And you need to just take the caps off and let state government spend whatever it wants to spend. But what was tried in Colorado is not what's being proposed here. What's being proposed here is that state government ought to live within the same limits that families live within, and that is that you can't spend more money than you have. Now, I want to take it the next step. I think local governments should not spend more, should not tax more than is absolutely necessary to take care of additional people who move into a community and to take care of the additional costs that government incurs in buying supplies. For 10 years in this state, Lloyd, we had local governments and state governments taking advantage of an explosive, speculative real estate market that drove up taxable values, and so government became addicted to those revenues, created recurring obligations, and now is going through the ringer in trying to do what families and small businesses do, and that's tighten its belt. We need a smart cap. We need to control taxing and spending.
Okay, question about growth management. The 1985 Growth Management Act was passed because of the abuse by developers on Florida communities and natural resources. The action in this year's legislature will undercut much of the act, making it easier for developers to do whatever they want. Why do you consider this a positive step? We're still on the air.
Well, sure.
Go ahead.
I think that many of us recognize the fact that the Department of Community Affairs was a barrier to prosperity. It was a barrier to more opportunity in the state, and that the decisions that affect local communities about how to responsibly grow ought to be made at the community level, where citizens can go and participate in the decision-making process. Not a lot of citizens have the opportunity to go to Tallahassee and talk about what is a good development or a bad development, a good growth decision or a bad one, but they can show up at their county commission chambers, at their city council chambers. And so this gives more opportunity for local control while preserving the important environmental elements of Florida that we all hold dear.
Okay, just a couple of minutes left. Why didn't anyone do their homework before cuts were made to this disabled programs affecting the disabled?
Well, I serve on the Health Appropriations Committee in the Senate. We did a lot of homework. The first piece of information we learned was that the Agency for Persons with Disabilities is the most poorly managed agency in state government. This year they overspent their legal appropriations by $170 million and violated the law because they didn't throw up a red flag and say, we're running out of cash. So the homework that wasn't done was by the people who mismanaged and misran the Agency for Persons with Disabilities, and in my view, ill-served disabled Floridians and ill-served the taxpayers. And I encourage the governor to fire as many of the top-level people as possible so that we could get back to a sensible policy and take care of our most vulnerable citizens.
Okay, we're down to just a minute. I guess that's, I'm going to have to hold these questions, and we'll just do another extra 2 hours or so if you want to stay. I don't think we have that option, though. We appreciate your being here. Of course, Clay Ingram, Doug Broxton, Matt Gaetz, Clay Ford, our senators, Evers and Gaetz. Thank you very much for coming on and answering these questions as best you could. And there's some tough questions in here, and you bounced right off you. Thank you very much for watching our Dialogue with the Delegation program. Legislators have plenty of online links if you'd like to get in touch with them and ask them questions yourself. Thank you for watching. I'm Lloyd Patterson for WSRE. Good night.